There is a number that changed everything for one family. $300 million. That is what Johnny Carson was worth when he died. $300 million built over 30 years of being the most powerful man in American television. But here is the thing that nobody talks about. That number did not bring this family joy. It brought them pain. It brought them tears. It brought them a final, cold rejection from beyond the grave. This is not a story about how a man became rich. This is a story about what that richness actually cost the people who shared his blood. And by the end of what I am about to tell you, you will understand why a man who gave away $156 million to strangers could not find it in himself to love his own grandchild. Johnny Carson was not just a television host. He was a force. He was the kind of man that an entire network built its empire around. NBC knew exactly what it had when it looked at Johnny Carson. It had the single most valuable asset in American television. And for 30 years, from 1962 to 1992, that asset delivered. At the height of his power in the early 1990s, Carson was pulling in $25 million a year. That is not adjusted for inflation. That is what he was actually taking home. If you adjust that number for today, you are looking at something closer to $55 or $57 million in a single year going to one man. But even that number does not capture the full picture, because long before he hit that peak, Carson was already the highest paid person on television. Back in the mid-1970s, he was making $4 million a year. And that was a time when $4 million was a number most Americans could not even comprehend. This was his leverage. NBC understood something very simple. Johnny Carson was the reason people turned on their televisions at night. He brought in the celebrities, he brought in the crowds. He was irreplaceable, and he knew it. But salary alone did not build a $300 million fortune. The real move, the one that separated Johnny Carson from every other entertainer of his generation, came in 1980. That year, Carson sat down with NBC and negotiated something far beyond a raise. He negotiated ownership. His company, Carson Productions, was given a controlling stake in The Tonight Show itself. Think about what that means. The network's biggest show, the flagship of its entire late-night lineup, was not owned by the network. It was owned by Johnny Carson. And he did not stop there. The deal also gave him authority over the time slot that followed his show, the 12:30 slot. Carson used that power to launch Late Night with David Letterman. And his company co-produced that show from 1982 all the way to 1993. He was not just the star. He was the kingmaker. He was collecting a paycheck as the host of the biggest show on television. And he was collecting ownership profits from two of the biggest shows on television. Carson Productions expanded beyond TV as well. The company produced films including the well-known 1983 movie The Big Chill. Salary made him wealthy. Ownership made him a dynasty. That is where the $300 million came from. And what does a man with that kind of money and that kind of power do with it? He builds walls. Johnny Carson was a deeply private man. He said it himself. He said he was shy. He was uncomfortable around people. So he used his fortune to construct the most elaborate fortress privacy could buy. His most famous home was a massive estate in Malibu, California, sitting on 4 acres of land on a cliff at Point Dume. He bought it in the mid-1980s for $9.5 million. It was designed by the architect Edward R. Niles, and it was unlike anything you have ever seen. The main structure was built from glass and wood, all sharp angles and triangles. It did not look like a home. It looked like a sculpture. Inside, the centerpiece of the entire house was an indoor arboretum, a living garden growing underneath a 30-foot glass ceiling. There was a sunken fireplace made of copper and glass. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass looking out over the Pacific Ocean. It was stunning. It was cold. It was exactly what Johnny Carson wanted. A beautiful place to disappear into. He lived there until the day he died. After his death, his widow sold the property in 2007 for $46 million. That same estate is now on the market for $110 million. But that Malibu estate was not his only property. He also owned a home in a suburb of New York City, a place the locals gave a very specific nickname. They called it the Carson Ballfield. The reason is surprisingly tender. Johnny Carson, the man who kept the entire world at arm's length, would let the neighborhood kids come onto his property and play baseball in his yard. Children he did not know. Children who had no connection to him whatsoever. He let them play. That small detail tells you something important about the man. He could be generous. He could be warm. But as we are going to find out, that warmth had very specific boundaries, and those boundaries were drawn tightly around his own family. Carson also spent his money on cars, and one purchase in particular became a symbol of everything complicated about his life. He was a major fan of the DeLorean DMC-12, the car with the gullwing doors that would later become famous through the Back to the Future films. Carson did not just admire the car. He invested $500,000 into the DeLorean Motor Company. And because of that investment, he was gifted 2 of the vehicles. Both cars turned into disasters. On his very first drive in one of them, the battery died on the highway. When that happened, the door locks stopped working. Johnny Carson, worth hundreds of millions of dollars, was trapped inside his own car on the side of the road. The second DeLorean brought even worse trouble. In 1982, Carson was pulled over while driving it after having been drinking wine at his favorite restaurant. He was arrested for drunk driving. It was a crack in the clean image he had spent decades building, shiny on the outside, full of problems underneath. The marriages were the other place where that image cracked. Johnny Carson was married 4 times, and the cost of those marriages was staggering. His first marriage to Jody Mack Walcott ended in 1963. They had 3 sons together, and the divorce was painful. His second marriage to Joanne Copeland also ended in divorce. But it was the third marriage that hit hardest financially. In 1972, he married a model named Joanna Holland. They stayed together for 12 years before divorcing in 1985, and when that divorce was settled, it was one of the most expensive in American history at that time. The settlement cost Carson an estimated $20 million. In today's money, that is somewhere between $48 and $58 million gone. He had to hand over $20 million in cash and property. It was the first time his personal life had directly carved a chunk out of his fortune, and it would not be the last. To understand why Johnny Carson kept failing at the one thing that should have mattered most, you have to go back to the very beginning. You have to understand the boy he was before he became the man the world watched every night. And that means understanding his mother. Johnny Carson was a cold man. His own friends acknowledged it. They said he was difficult to truly know. And Carson himself traced that coldness to one place. He once said, and these were his exact words, that he did not have much of a talent for happiness, and that his mother saw to that. Ruth Carson was the central wound in Johnny's life. People who knew her described her as cold and domineering. She was his harshest critic, and no matter what he achieved, it was never enough for her. His lawyer, Henry Bushkin, later wrote about a trip Carson bought for his parents, an all-expenses-paid tour of Europe. When they returned, Johnny called his mother and asked her about the highlights. Her response was 5 words: "It is good to be home." Another time, Carson sent her a beautiful mink coat. She sent it back. She said it was too fancy for Nebraska. But the story that captures their relationship most painfully involves a reporter from Time magazine. The reporter was writing a cover story on Johnny Carson and sat with Ruth while she watched her son deliver his monologue on television. When the jokes finished, Ruth turned to the reporter and said simply that was not funny. Then she left the room. It did not matter how famous he became. His own mother would not tell him he had done well. When Ruth Carson died in 1985, Johnny's reaction was blunt and shocking. He said, "The wicked witch is dead." But there was one final twist to that story that changed everything. After Ruth passed, workers cleaning out her home in Arizona found a large box. Inside were hundreds of newspaper and magazine clippings. Every article, every photo, every piece of coverage from Johnny's entire career, going all the way back to the very start. She had saved all of it. She was proud of him. She simply could never say it out loud. Johnny took that box and kept it in his bedroom closet for the rest of his life. That coldness shaped him in ways that went far beyond his personality. It shaped how he found his way into the world. Johnny Carson was intensely shy as a child. The comedian Dick Cavett, who knew him well, said it was genuinely hard for Johnny to interact with fans even as an adult. But when he was 12 years old, he bought a mail-order magician's kit, and something changed. He practiced card tricks on his family. His mother, Ruth, made him a cape. This awkward, socially uncomfortable boy discovered that on a stage, he could become someone else entirely. At 14, he performed his first show. He called himself the Great Carson. He was paid $3. From that point forward, Johnny Carson lived two lives. The man on television was not really him. It was a character he had built, a version of himself that could be charming and commanding and in control. Even one of his most famous recurring characters on The Tonight Show, Karnak the Magnificent, was born directly from that childhood love of magic. He learned early that strangers would give him applause. It was easier than getting love from his own family, and that inability to receive or give love within his family did not stop with his mother. It passed straight through him into the next generation. Johnny Carson had 3 sons with his first wife. Their names were Christopher, Rick, and Corey. After the divorce, the boys lived with Johnny and his successive wives. But life in that household was not warm. Carson was the same kind of father his mother had been to him. Distant, cold, unavailable. His youngest son, Corey, has spoken publicly about what it was like growing up as Johnny Carson's child. Corey said that work was easy for his father. Family was not. He said his father was the right man for his job, but that to achieve that success, he left his kids behind as a consequence. Corey described it as watching the magic unfold without ever being part of it. They were like the audience. They watched him on television. They did not get to be with him in real life. One memory Corey shared is particularly painful. He said it was hard to watch his father on The Tonight Show because sometimes Carson would have young children on as guests, and in those moments, Johnny would light up. He would be warm. He would be funny. He would be completely engaged with these kids, hanging on their every word. Corey would watch that and wonder what those children had that he and his brothers did not. Think about that. Think about being a young boy watching your own father pour affection into strangers on national television, while your own life at home felt empty. And remember the Carson ball field. Johnny could be a loving figure to neighborhood kids playing baseball in his yard. He could be enchanting with child guests on his show for 10 minutes at a time, but he could not do it for his own sons. That was the life of the Carson boys, watching the magic from a distance. Then the distance was shattered by tragedy. On June 21, 1991, Johnny's middle son Rick was driving near the beach in California. He was 39 years old. He lost control of his car. The vehicle plunged more than 100 feet down an embankment. Rick Carson was killed. The death hit Johnny in a way that nothing else ever had. For the first time in his life, the walls came down. His lawyer, Henry Bushkin, documented what happened afterward. At some point after Rick's death, Johnny Carson did something he had never done before. He apologized. He sat down with his 2 surviving sons, Chris and Corey, and he told them he was sorry. He said he was sorry for not being there when they needed him. It took the worst possible thing a father can experience to finally crack him open. And even then, the apology came too late for one son. It came too late for one very small person who never even got the chance to hear it. This is where the story turns darkest. Johnny's oldest son, Chris, had a daughter. Her name was Crystal Love Carson. She was born in 1986, and she was Johnny Carson's one and only grandchild. Crystal was biracial, and Johnny Carson, the man who entertained the world for 30 years, refused to have anything to do with her. Chris was in a custody and child support battle with Crystal's mother, Tanina Love Green, and during that legal process, the details of Chris's finances came out. The court revealed that Chris was working as a golf instructor, but his main source of income was his father. Johnny Carson was paying for his son's life. He was giving Chris $35,000 a year on top of buying him cars and a home. So Carson was financially supporting his own son, but he refused to acknowledge his son's child. According to reports, Crystal tried to reach her grandfather. She sent him letters. She sent him homemade cards. She sent him photographs of herself as a little girl. She wanted any acknowledgement at all, any sign that she existed to him. She received nothing. Johnny Carson rejected every attempt. He refused to even look at a photograph of his own grandchild. This was not an oversight. This was not neglect born from distance or distraction. This was an active, deliberate choice. A man who was paying for his son's entire existence chose to erase his son's daughter from his life completely. So after a lifetime of keeping everyone close to him at arm's length, after rejecting his own blood, after failing his sons and ignoring his grandchild, the question becomes the most important one. Who did he leave the $300 million to? Johnny Carson died on January 23, 2005. He was 79 years old. He died from respiratory failure. His will was sealed. The details were not made public for some time. But eventually the truth came out, and the truth was one final, cold statement to his family. The largest single portion of Johnny Carson's estate, $156 million, was given to the John W. Carson Foundation. That foundation supports children, education, and health services in Los Angeles and in Nebraska. He also left $4 million directly to the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. These are generous acts. $156 million has done real good in the world. But his widow, Alexis, and his two surviving sons, Chris and Corey, were left to divide whatever remained after that enormous gift to strangers. Imagine being one of those sons who spent your entire life in this man's shadow. You watched him give his warmth to other people's children on television. You endured his coldness at home. You watched your brother die. You received one late apology. You watched your own daughter, his only grandchild, be completely and deliberately rejected. And then the will is read, and you learn that more than half of everything he ever built was given away. Not to you, to the public, to strangers. His final act confirmed what his sons had always felt. His work mattered to him, his legacy mattered to him, his image mattered to him, his family was simply too hard. Johnny Carson once said that none of that money made him happy. He said it was silly to make money your only purpose in life. So what was the point of all of it? He answered that too. He said money gives him one big thing that really matters, and that is the freedom of not having to worry about money. In the end, he had all the freedom in the world, but his family was left holding a $300 million question that no amount of money has ever been able to answer. What good is all that freedom if you end up completely and utterly alone?